Welcome to another episode of The Next Generation. Today I have Jackie Mundt on with me. And y'all, when I first heard about Jackie, the words that were told to me was she's a powerhouse and does everything and anything that you ask her to. She's involved in all of the things, knows about all the topics. And that's pretty much the only intro that I'm going to give Jackie because she's amazing. I am so excited for today's conversation. Jackie, please take it away. Tell everyone a little bit about yourself, what you do, who you are, all the things.
Thanks, Lauren. Well, I'm going to give the really quick background so we can get that out of the way. I grew up in central Wisconsin, and my hometown is actually the exact geographic center of the state. And in Wisconsin, we do use our hands to introduce ourselves. My family has a dairy operation, and most of my dad's family is also in the paper making industry. So I grew up in 4-H and FFA, and then served as both a state and national officer in the FFA organization, which opened up lots of doors for me and took me to California for my undergraduate. So I have a degree in agricultural communications from Fresno State. And after that, I went to work in the world of agribusiness. And so I was a chemical sales rep for Dow AgriSciences for a few years. And then I went to the corporate headquarters in Indianapolis and had a chance to work on brand implementation and a couple of different projects there. And eventually, my partner and I decided it was time for us to start transitioning to his family's farm. So now I live in Pratt, Kansas, which is about an hour outside of Wichita to the west. And Mark farms full time. We have dry land and irrigated crops, so corn, wheat, soybeans, sorghum, and we also have cow-calf pairs. I work off the farm as the director of communications at Kansas Co-op. And outside of this, we're going to talk about a lot of our community involvement. But Farm Bureau is one of the organizations that I've spent a lot of time on and been able to be a part of different training groups, as well as have competed in their young farmer and rancher competitions. And one of my claims to fame is that I have won 2 pickups from those competitions. I won the discussion meet in 2019 on the national level, and then the Excellence in Ag competition in 2021. And I'm currently in the Partners in Advocacy Leadership Program, where they pick 10 people from across the country from Farm Bureau to develop their advocacy skills. So I've gotten to do a lot of really cool things in my life. But I think we're going to talk about maybe the path that people don't expect me to talk about today. So there's my quick intro.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I think that pretty much just puts it all into perspective of Jackie's powerhouseness because she is amazing. And I am so excited for today's conversation and just all the things that we're going to get to talk about. I want to go back a little bit before we dive too much into like our main topic today and stuff and talk about your guys' decision to come back to rural Kansas. And that's a big decision to make as someone who was extremely involved in just like all the national organizations. You went to school in California, you did all the things, you had like the world was your oyster. You could have pretty much done anything, and you and Mark decided to come back to rural Kansas. Can you talk about kind of that path and that decision that you guys made there?
Yeah, I didn't share that Mark was also in the corporate world. So when we met, we were both living in California. He was out there working for Payless Shoe Source, who had a distribution center out there that he was a manager at. And I was going to school in Fresno. And we actually met at the World Ag Expo in Tulare. I mean, that is about as like ag meet cute as it gets. And here we are like 15, 16 years later. But we both really enjoyed California and other places and our corporate careers, but at some point knew we wanted to come home to his family's farming operation because it's a great place to build a life and to have hopefully children someday. And so we kind of started to make the transition. It took us a little while to get us both here, but now we're both here. We're living and working in the community and really trying to contribute in a big way. So for us, the decision was not a difficult decision to make. There are probably some moments in the transitions to being here that were a little uncomfortable because even though I grew up in a town of 800 and now we live in a town of about 6,000, actually we live out in the country, but about 6,000 people in town, we're just a lot further away from everything. And when we first moved to our house, we didn't have internet. So there's some of those challenges of moving back to rural America. that actually opened the door for like, okay, well, you got to advocate for these things if you want to have a great life. But that was where our heads were at, is we wanted to be here. We want to continue the farming legacy. We want to build a life for ourselves. And that's why we decided that.
Yeah, and now you kind of live a life and have a philosophy that you guys are rural by choice.
Yes.
You fully consciously made the decision to be in rural America. It wasn't by happen chance. It was fully by choice, and you guys have built a very successful and abundant life with that. Talk about that whole rural by choice philosophy and everything like that.
Yeah, actually, when we made the decision that it was time for me to move back to Pratt, I actually quit my job with Dow AgriSciences and did not have another job lined up, and so that was scary for all kinds of different reasons. But I also tell people that that was incredibly liberating for me because it was the first time in my life I didn't really know what I was going to do next, and I think a lot of people's identities are wrapped up in their careers. And so you kind of have that crisis of like, what do I want to do next? But I also had to recognize like, what are the opportunities that I'm going to be able to have in rural Pratt, Kansas? And so for me, it was kind of, it was an interesting experience. And I did a couple different things in there before I got to work for Kansas. But during that time, it really helped me, I think, to grow as an individual because I think I'm a better employee because I know what I want to do. I know what I'm good at, and I'm able to articulate those things as well as probably set the boundaries of what I need and what you're going to be able to get the best work out of me from. So it was a big decision, you know, to make that move. I think for Mark, it was a little bit easier. He always knew that he was coming home to the farm and like had a built-in job, although he told people that he like that we were a a house that has basically two people in it who don't have jobs when he first moved back. But farming is absolutely a job. So we made that choice and have not looked back.
Yeah, and it's a choice that can be really hard sometimes, especially like you look at rural America and as someone that like you grew up in a small town, so obviously you know that there are opportunities there. There are things, but you look at the world map and you look at Pratt, Kansas, and you're like, that's where I want to end up. Yep, okay, that's you know what? We're gonna build a life there. And it's gonna be awesome. And you might have to gaslight yourself into that reality sometimes, but you guys have made the most of that experience and you have built a amazing life in Pratt, Kansas, which I don't know if previous to this conversation I would have said those two things in the same sentence. I'm being completely honest. If you're not from Kansas, I'm sorry, you don't know what we're talking about, but if you are from Kansas, if you know, you know. But you guys have built an amazing life in Pratt, and it's really awesome what you guys are doing there. And you're extremely involved in your community too. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I think is important about this conversation is when you do decide to be rural by choice, there's really interesting and weird dynamics moving into like how do you get involved in the community? Because there's a little bit of a sense of like, I'm not from Pratt. And I actually lived here when I was a sales rep before Mark was here by myself. And I always tell people, I'm really glad that I did that before I went to Indianapolis and came back because I had a little bit of a set of connections and network established myself that weren't dependent on him. Because I think so many times people make the decision to go home to a spouse's hometown and they're like forever, oh, that's Mark's, partner Jackie, not like, hey, that's Jackie. So it was good for me to get established, but there's a little bit sometimes of like, who is this person and why are they showing up? Which is really unfortunate because in rural America, like we need people. We need people who are showing up and helping and being leaders. But it's also kind of human nature to not like know who the outsider is. And so when we first got back to Pratt, I always joke with people, but it's a true story. When I first lived here, it was a year before I made a friend. And then I only had one friend. Somebody was nice to me and she became, my bestie in town. But it's a slow process to get established. And I kind of jump started a little bit the second time that I got back, but it took a little time to start getting on some boards. One of the first boards I served on was the Extension Council in our community, and I really loved that group. That was actually the first group of people that was nice to me when I moved to Pratt. Like they took me in and they, wanted me to feel comfortable in the community. And so I got to meet some people through that board. I joined the Farm Bureau Board and helped with the collegiate organization at the college. I tell people all the time, like, if you want to get involved in things, like I just kept showing up and people realize like, hey, this girl wants to be involved and she wants to, serve in leadership positions and she's willing to help. That's really kind of what it takes sometimes if you are the outsider. And eventually got involved in a lot of different things. I've served on the chamber in our town. Currently, I am the economic development representative for the chamber. So I work with the committee that's basically between the county and the city and the chamber to try to develop business in the area. We're also really involved in the Oktoberfest celebration in Pratt. So we have a great group of people that we put together a fun night of Oktoberfest every year. And then we donate all the proceeds to local charities to help with local projects. I'm very involved in my church as well. And so it took a little while, but now my plate is very full. I would say for Mark, his path was similar in the fact that it wasn't instantaneous, but because he's from here, he's got like the old connections. And so, he's been asked to serve as the county representative on the hospital board, which basically is the board that makes the decisions about the building and the ownership of the hospital, not the management of it. But so he got involved in that. He's got some other clubs that he's a member of, and he recently was elected to the electric co-op board. And so we've really both kind of seen an opportunity, but also a need in our community for us to fill some of those roles. And that's probably for me the easiest way to actually make friends and a connection is getting involved in your community.
Can you talk a little bit more about seeing that need in your community and as a young individual coming back to a community, making that decision to get involved? It is a very conscious decision sometimes of like, sometimes you fall into it and you just get asked, but sometimes it is like, no, I see a need here. Like, I'm going to go like do XYZ or stuff like that. And it can be a daunting decision, especially when a community is made up of quote unquote, like the founding families, and you don't want to like ruffle the feathers, but you also want to ruffle the feathers to build a community. Talk a little bit more about that.
I always tell people that I'm actually just being really selfish when I'm on all these boards. Because when I think about the community that I want to live in, I want to hang out with people who are, invested in their community, who are doing great things. Like I want to have a great peer group. I want to have a great community to live in. And I want our community to be thriving, to have businesses, which are conveniences to us that help to keep our business running, but also just make my life a lot easier. And so if those things are going to happen, there have to be people who are willing to step up and say like, okay, hey, here's a need in our community. Here's something that needs to happen. One of the things though, that I think is interesting about rural communities is that sometimes there's this sense of like, okay, we need a warm body. So I often hear people recruiting for boards within the community saying like, don't worry, all you have to do is show up to a meeting once a month. And I would say that I have had some times in my career where I've definitely been like, okay, I have a lot on my plate at work. That's great. We're coming in and we're approving the bills and, basically just going through the motions on boards. But over the last couple of years, several of the organizations that I have been in town have gone through some really serious changes in leadership and had to ask ourselves some really difficult conversations. And that really opened my eyes to me of, if you want to have a great community, be willing to put in the work and ask the questions that nobody else that aren't popular. One of the groups that I'm a part of, the chamber, at one point we were without a chamber director and the conversation was asked, do we even need a chamber in our community anymore? Like, we don't want to be the people who kill it, but is this something that businesses even want anymore? And I can say that through those conversations and through the work that board put in, it has been very clear that our business community does want to have a chamber and that it brings a lot of value to the community. And there's lots of people who are willing to support it. But we had to kind of put the work in and ask some of those questions. I'd say similarly, with the Oktoberfest committee, I tell people this is probably my favorite volunteer thing that we do because it's a group of people who are, within probably about 10 years of us in either direction. But there's about 15 of us who plan this event every year. And it's probably the only time I've ever served on a board or committee where absolutely every person contributes in like a significant way. It's really fun because we like get together and drink beer when we plan our meetings. And then we all get our stuff done and, nobody's got to be carrying the whole weight of the organization and the event. And then we have a fun activity at the end of the year. And then we get to be the good guys who give money away. So it's really great to do those type of things. They are a lot of work, but for us, we look at it as one, hey, that's an opportunity to have some great peers and friends. But two, it's that end game of we're doing something fun for us that turns into something good for the community. So I think that those are things that I would think about as you think about the why of getting involved. Like, how do you want to make your community better? And that's why we do it. And I guess the other thing that I would say too is like the warm body thing is a very real thing. And if you are a person who does start showing up and helping with things, like I said, they're going to put you to work, but it's going to happen really quickly. And I think the other thing that I've had to learn is where to say no and where my boundaries are. I'm not very good at it. But for me, actually, some of my work in Farm Bureau kind of helped me to clarify, like, what am I trying to do in a meaningful way in my community? And I realized that the areas that I'm really passionate about service in kind of fall into three categories. So for me, that's agricultural advocacy, youth development, and community vitality. So I have started to take the approach that, like, when I get asked to do a volunteer activity, I try to take it through that lens. So like we host the Miss Kansas pageant every year in Kansas, and we're involved and help with a bunch of different things. And a couple of years ago, they came to me and said like, hey, we'd love to have you organize meals for the girls the week they're here. And like, it felt really bad for me, but I told them like, that's not really my skill set. I'm not passionate about it. Like, I will do other things for you that I am good at, but I'm not going to put my heart and soul into that. It's going to be honestly a burden for me, and you're probably not going to get great performance from me. And so I politely declined that. And I've had other opportunities. I've had the animal shelter in town has asked me to be on their board. And I'm like, I don't think I'm passionate enough about pets and animals. I mean, I have a cat. She's a princess, but she's my child. And that's really the only pet that I care about. So being able to say that, it didn't make me a bad person. It's just, I'm not going to put the effort in probably in the way that I need to. And that allows me to be available when there are opportunities that come up that I'm excited about. And I think that that's hard to do, but if you can figure out what are those things that you want to be helping with, where do your skills align, being able to tell people that and articulate that is probably as good of a reason to turn them down as anything.
Oh, absolutely. I seriously couldn't agree more. It's one of those things that's like you need to be real and you need to be honest with yourself and the fact that like, okay, this is where my passion lies. These are the things I actually give a flying rat's ass about.
Mhm.
And like if I'm asked to be on these other boards, like I am just going to be a warm body, and that's not doing me any good. That's not doing them any good. It's not doing our community any good. So it's like, okay, where are the areas that I actually have strengths in? Like what ways and capacities can I serve these different organizations or different things that I want to be involved in and make an impact? And then where are the areas that I'm like, absolutely not. Like it is not worth my time, not worth their energy and effort to try and train me for this role, train me and get me up to speed on what's going on. It's just best for everyone that I decline. And there's a lot of power in that. Like it's genuinely better for you and better for the community as an individual to be able to say no to things. And it's a hard concept to learn sometimes, but once you get good at saying no, you're going to say no to everything. And then you're going to live an amazing life because you won't be a people pleaser anymore like me and just say yes to everything in the world. And just be like, no to all the things that don't align, and it will be great and grand, and you'll live in a wonderful magical land that I am not familiar with.
I don't know that I've ever gotten good at saying no, but it is easier for me to recognize that, like, again, if it's not moving the needle in one of those areas that I love, not only all the things that I talked about, but like it's really hard to find fulfillment in those activities. And so like my motivation and my excitement kind of just goes down a bit. And so it sometimes is very hard to tell people no. But I try to do it in as kind of a way possible and, help them to understand why. With the Miss Kansas thing, one of the things that I kind of said, like, hey, I am glad to help with like prep interviews and things for the girls before they go to the Miss America competition. And that's where my skills lie, right? Like preparing somebody to do an interview, asking questions about current events. That's what I'm good at. And there's not a ton of people who are really good at that. So that's a place that I'm filling a need in that organization that maybe isn't as big as organizing meals, but it's still something they need help with.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you expand a little bit more on just like the leadership side of that and that aspect of like pouring into those young individuals? So you're like, hey, I'm going to do this Miss Kansas pageant. I'm going to be involved in these things, but like I also want to, as a leader, pour into that next generation of leaders or just pour into people in those roles. Can you talk a little bit more about just developing people in rural
Yeah.
communities and things like that too?
So one of my three key areas is youth development. And I feel really passionate about that because I had so many great people as I was growing up pour into me and help me to develop my skills and give me experiences. And I wouldn't be where I am today if those people hadn't made that investment, hadn't helped me to develop into a leader. And I believe that everyone can build leadership skills and can have experiences that make them into a great community member. And so I try really hard to work with young people in different capacities, mostly in places where they're maybe doing speaking competitions or leadership activities. But I want to work with kids because I do want to have a future generation of leaders out there. And so a couple of the places I do that, I'm the advisor for the Collegiate Farm Bureau chapter at our community college. That's one of my favorite groups because I do really well with college students because I'm pretty direct with them. But again, these a lot of times are students who it's kind of their first time away from home. And so we're having the opportunity where like I treat them like an adult and we have conversations about issues in the world and how things work. And we try to have travel experiences and help them to understand why being involved in your community is really important. There's lots of other places that I'm working with younger students. I've helped with our 4-H ambassadors in the county. I help with both of our FFA chapters here in the community. And I think those things are really important and do try to be available to use my skill set where I can. But for me, I want to make sure that there are people, and not just in Pratt, but in communities around Kansas and around our country who are someday going to be willing to say, yes, I'll serve on the school board, or yes, I will be my Farm Bureau representative to this board. We need those people who are willing to get involved and do those things. And I don't know that most people grow up just being wired to say yes to that stuff. But I think working with the students, I hopefully help teach them that it's a really great thing to do. It can be very fulfilling, but also just in any of those situations, you're continuing to grow and learn. And that's a good thing for you and your career and your family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's almost overlooked sometimes in communities to start pouring into those young college students or young adults, young, like maybe they're 18-year olds, seniors in high school or something like that. And truly taking the time and energy to pour into them to be like, hey, you have a place. Like if you come back, if that's a decision that you make for you and your family, like there will be a place for you. And we want to support you in that. I feel like it is so often looked at as like, no, this is my way or the highway. These are the ways that we're going to do it. And it's the same way that we've been doing it for the past 50 years because we have the same people serving on the same boards. And I think that communities need to do a better job across the state of Kansas, across the nation, in empowering their young leaders and empowering people to be like, hey, no, like I want you to come back. Not your mom isn't the only person that wants you to come back. Like, hey, other people in the community want you to come back and go off and get a degree, go off and like do your things. But then like we have a place for you if you want it. And these are the ways that we're going to empower you, even if you don't stay in our community, to go serve another community. And can you just talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that? Just kind of the stigma of like people not wanting people to serve, but then also like just continuing to equip people as well.
So you hit the nail on the head there. 20 years ago, nobody asked people to move back to their hometown to come back to rural America. There's again, I'm a nerd and I read a lot of stuff, and there's some fascinating sociology work that's been done about like how basically rural America took all their resources, put them in kids, and shipped them away, and said, "Go do great things in the big city," which leaves a hole in small communities of who's going to be there. And so that, like, understanding that really changed my perspective, because not only am I trying to build a community that has, in Pratt, we talk about, great parks and lots of things to be involved in, from culture and music and activities and, just nice, what I would call community amenities. But we also need to have people who are willing to come back in the future. And there's actually a group of guys, most of them are involved in the Oktoberfest committee here in our community, who they kind of made a pact in high school that they were all going to move back home together. And it's so cool because they have a friend group of hey, here's all the guys that we grew up together with. Some of their wives are from here, some are not, but they're raising their children together. And they've kind of got the built-in community. And I'm like, man, I wish somebody would have connected that, because Mark is from here, but very few of the people that he hung out with in high school or knew when he was at community college are still here in the community. And we've had to, build relationships and find friends, which is great. But I think when you have somebody who is intentionally asking you to come back, you think about it in a different way. And to your point, it's great for people to go out into the world. I think that's so valuable. Go do college or training somewhere, travel, try living somewhere else, because it gives you a totally different perspective of the way we do it in our community is not the way that it has to be done, because there are lots of different ways to accomplish the same thing, and they're all okay. Or I shouldn't say they're all okay, but there are different things that can work. And so I think that that's a really powerful piece of it. And in my work, I am not necessarily trying to get kids just to come back to Pratt, although I do tell them hey, we'd love to have you come back in Pratt. But one of the things about Pratt is that we have a lot going for us. We've got a thriving business community. We have a lot of those amenities, hospitals and schools and all the things that you need in a community. There's a lot of places, especially as you move west of here, that don't have people coming home to their communities, and their communities are dying. And to your point about getting young people involved, some of that is because there aren't opportunities. And so when young people looked out, at what can I do here? How can I make a difference here? It was kind of well, you're not old enough. In 20 or 30 years, you can do it. But we really need to be asking the question now, encouraging people to be here and giving them the opportunity to learn and to get involved. Our Farm Bureau board is really fun because we have term limits, so you can serve up to 4 years in a row and then you have to get off the board. And we've always had an incredibly young board. And I look at boards in other counties, there's nothing wrong with it, but they've had the same officers for, 35 years. And so you're just not opening opportunities for new people to learn that leadership skill, to understand your organization. So I think there's great opportunities there to start asking people, even if they're not, maybe they don't have the skills now or, perfectly ready for it. Is it a way to get them ready? When people ask me what's one piece of advice you have in a small town? I tell people, serve on the board of an organization and you will really get to know what it does, what its purpose is, how it works. You don't have to serve on it forever, but that gives you such a great look at what that organization is doing, how it fits in the community, how it can be helpful. And for me, it's been fun to do a bunch of those, because then I can start to tie together resources in our community and figure out who fills what need in what place. And so serving on a board, even if you're not, the person who's gung-ho and gonna be leading the whole thing, is just a great opportunity to learn and understand your community better.
It absolutely is. And I love the part that you talked about of we for years in rural America were equipping these young leaders and then sending them off into the world and be hey, go do something big in the big city. And that's amazing if that is the decision that you made in your life. And we need people to do that. We absolutely do. But we also need these specialized degrees, people with degrees, people with special skills, people that have all of these things that we're developing in rural America to come back. And I feel for a long time, at least in my generation, it was looked at as, if you go back home, you're a failure. And you failed and that's why you returned home. Or you are it was either that or you had like a really, really thick like name in the family that like for generations that family has been there and like it was kind of expected for you to come back. It was one of the two. And if you didn't do that, then it was like, and even my parents were like, go do something with your life, like go do big things, not here. And now we're getting over the stigma of like, and it's still a process for me to go through of like, hey, if I make the decision to go back to my hometown, it's not a failure. I'm not failing. Like it's getting over that stigma. And there was a really long time that we pushed that in rural communities. And we're still getting over that hump of like being like, oh, hey, actually we lied. We do want you to come back because our populations are declining at rapid rates and we don't have people to fill these needs. We don't have doctors. We don't have lawyers. We don't have people with these specialized degrees that, you know what, they could go to the big city and make probably 3 times what they're making in rural communities, but we do need them here too. And even if it's not that, we need electricians, we need plumbers, we need people in these communities. And it just was pushed for so long to get out and go do something, which is awesome, but then come back, please, because we need you here too. We need you in Kansas.
Yes. Well, and I also encourage people to, we do need all of those professional careers that you talked about, but there's tremendous opportunities for almost every kind of job. In many of the communities in Western Kansas, like Pratt County has had less than 2% unemployment forever. We don't have enough people. And I know there's lots of counties like that. There's lots of different types of job opportunities available. And I think the other thing is when you have a skill set, I think that you can find opportunities in small communities. So think about what I do. Outside of maybe being in journalism or on the radio, there's not a lot of things that people would think that a person could do in rural Kansas with a communications degree. And it's kind of funny, when I was hired to do this job, the job was created basically not for me, but it was created and I kind of fell into it. It was the perfect fit. But there were 3 other companies in town that basically kind of did the same thing and recognized needing someone to do communications and marketing. And so it's been interesting to see how those jobs have developed. But again, 20 years ago, I don't think someone who has my skill set would have thought about having a job. But there's so many more needs in rural America for a lot of different types of jobs. Now technology and agriculture has gotten to a point where we need people to do IT work and to do precision ag. I mean, there's a lot of high skill, high paying jobs, and some of them technical trade jobs. Like you can have a really great life. And that's what I would point to. Like you may make more money in the big city, but you can have a really good quality of life because it is cheaper to live here. And I tell people I have the best of both worlds because we live in a great community, small town, all the amenities, good stuff. But like we can leave and go on vacation and travel the world and go see different places. And during the pandemic, it was incredibly clear that I didn't want to live in a city. I've got miles to myself in the country, and there were people who were stuck in their apartments and high rises. And I was like, this is farm privilege right here, and I am so here for it.
Absolutely. And I think that it's one of those things that we just need to continue to encourage people that like you do have a place no matter what your role is or what your job is. And like in my community, it was okay, you have a place and you can drive to Kansas City if that's what you so choose to do or something like that. But like we have a really amazing quality of life out here and just continuing to develop leadership in that and developing that next generation to be like, hey, we want you to come back, here's your place, this is what it could look like for you, this doesn't have to be what it's going to be looking like for you, but there are options for you to come back to your rural communities and to succeed. Up to Jackie's point, like you went and did all of these things and then you and Mark kind of looked at your lives and you were like, we don't want to live in California anymore. We don't want to live in the cities. Let's go live in our rural community and bring all of this knowledge that we gained back to our rural community and continue to develop it. I would love to talk a little bit about you and Mark deciding like you're both going to be super involved in your community, but you have different skill sets and the importance. You and I kind of talked about this off air a little bit, but the importance of choosing someone to do life with that is going to support you and support your goals, support your ambitions, and kind of be that life partner that you really need them to be. But then like also acknowledging that you both have your individual skill sets. Like you told me a story of you were asked to serve on something and you were like, actually, I think you need to talk to Mark about that because
Yes.
he will do a much better job than I ever could. And acknowledging that like you have your individual strengths and as a couple deciding to go back and serve as well.
Yeah, and I think Mark and I are really blessed that we've always aligned on values and just where we want to go, like what we're trying to do in our community. And we do have different skill sets, but we're a fun couple to be around because we're both, I think, a little bit stubborn. But as we think about doing life together, we do have those conversations, those big picture conversations about what are we trying to do here? What are our goals for our community? I'll tell the story that you're talking about. One of our board members at the co-op had approached me because he also served on the rural electric cooperative board and said, "Hey, we'd love to have you run for the board. We're going to have a position open. Would you be interested?" And I told him, I said, I'd be interested, but I don't think I'm the right person to do that because Mark, as a farmer who is running irrigation and utilizing a lot of power, is the person who's going to be more tuned into what the needs are for our rural community. And, they talk about power rates and different things like that. Like he's just going to be a better resource in that situation. And I told him, like, you're getting the good end of the deal here. Like he's the person who's going to do tons of research and he's very detailed and those types of things. And I think that when you're running a business like that, you need someone like that. And so, he and I talked about it. And we talked about also just like workload. I had a lot of other things that I was doing at the time. And so it made sense for Mark to be the person kind of in that situation. And I don't know that every opportunity it's like hey, we both need to talk about this. Sometimes there's things that like, it's very clear to me that I've been asked to do something and it's my skill set that they're looking for. But I think that is one of the things that I appreciate is that both Mark and I are contributing at a high level. I always like joke with him, like, hey, I can't be the only one pulling my weight around here. Like you got to help with stuff. But, and people say that normally like in their home, and I'm talking about the community is, I give him a hard time if he's not involved in as many things as I am. But I also think from the perspective of mental health, I talk about this with people who ask about work-life balance. I've done some workshops for Farm Bureau about it. And I tell people the single best thing that I have for my work-life balance and my mental health is Mark, because if you're in a partnership, not only should your goals and your values align, but you need help at times in your life. Everybody needs help. We have busy seasons and we have other seasons where we have time and capacity to do things. And having a partner like Mark, it's kind of funny. We go back and forth during the year with, those seasons of life. There are times during the year where like, no kidding, I'm on the road 3 out of 4 weeks of the month. I'm going to lots of meetings. I've got tons of stuff going on in the community, activities, events. And I'm not necessarily a person who gets really stressed out, but I get like really intense about all the things that I need to get done. And it's nice to know that during those times, like Mark's going to take care of stuff at the house. He's going to make sure that the cat is fed and like, the house, we have laundry, clean laundry, and, that things get taken care of. Sometimes it's running errands, doing different things. And I know that I can ask him for help. I've got that trust there, but he's a farmer. So the same thing in return. There are times during the year where like, this is go time. This is our busy season. Mark's going to be in the tractor 20 hours a day. So what does he need help with? Is that packing lunches? Is that running to the post office for him? Like, what are those things that I can do to support him? And so we kind of have like at different times during the year, like one of us is the main focus of the relationship. Like this is the person who needs the support because this is what we've got going on. And that's okay. Like I think it makes us both feel less guilty when we do have to be the person who's like slacking on the things at home. Like it's a running joke in our house that like anytime one of us is gone, the other one is like apologizing when you're on your way home saying like, I'm so sorry, the house is a mess. but I think the house was probably a mess before I left, so it's not really all on him. But we just joke about that because I mean, it seems to be. I think everybody deals with that in their homes of just like it's a lot to keep up in the world we live in, and so to be able to know that like I don't really need to feel guilty because I'm not pulling my weight right now because I'll do it at a different point is helpful. So we're fortunate to be aligned in like, hey, we've got these goals and we're working together to do them, but also we're trying to support each other and make sure that the other one is as successful as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that is just so important when you're like choosing the person that you're going to do like the rest of your life with as a person who's a high achiever. Like, I totally understand that. And I'm so blessed with my husband because it's like, it's the same exact way that like, I don't even have to really say it. And he knows that like, he's just going to do it. Like, he knows that like, he can get home from work and like, he just like, he can feel my energy. He knows that it's been a long day and he's like, I'm going to go cook dinner now. Okay, I'll talk to you if you wrap up your work. I'll talk to you in an hour or something like that. And it's just having someone who like is supporting and acknowledges like, hey, like these are our goals. I'm going to be your person. I'm going to be your rock. And then also like, you're going to be my rock when that season of life comes around and stuff like that. And I think it's so important that we acknowledge as leaders in our industries, as leaders in agriculture, as leaders in rural communities, that it's a lot easier if you don't have to do it alone. And it doesn't have to be a partner or a spouse or something like that. It can be someone else too. It can be a really amazing friend. It can be a really supportive family or someone like that. But you have to have that person or those people that you can like, that are your tribe, are the people that like when it's time to rally the troops, they're going to be there. And like they're going to be able to support you along those journeys because you can't do it all. And it's really important to acknowledge as an individual that like you have areas where you're like I can run 110 miles an hour during this season, but when that burnout hits, I'm going to face plant and I'm going to face plant hard. And I need some people that are going to be there to pick me up, or I need some people that are going to be running alongside of me, catching my mess while I'm running or something like that, that just can support you during the craziness. Cause I'm sure Jackie gets it that like life is crazy and you need that person or those people that are going to kind of be there. And we're so blessed in rural communities to kind of have that built in as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are great people in the community, and they're so willing to help. And I think that one of the points you said there, and that of choosing a spouse, like these are conversations that it's good to have when you're young and you're dating, thinking about not just I want somebody who makes me laugh, but is this a person whose style works well with mine? Like Mark and I are very different people in some ways, but I think we're really similar in like we're both excited about people. We both like to learn and are curious and like to travel. There's not a lot of farmers out there who like to travel, and so I got lucky and found a good one. But when you said that about being a high achieving person finding the right spouse, I joke that nobody else in the world could live with me. Like God said, yep, you two are, I've made you for each other and this is what's happening because, Mark's a different cat and I appreciate him and I'm a lot to deal with and he appreciates me. And so it works. But, I love to tell the story that on like probably our first or second date, we met at a wedding. And so then probably the first time that Mark came to see me in Fresno, I laughed because I got asked to speak at like a fundraising function for our foundation. And it was like a golf tournament and there was like a dinner. And so I said, yeah, I'll speak. And it was a last minute thing. They said, can you go to this event? I said, I'll speak, but like, can I bring a date? Which, okay. So, it's us in our early 20s, in a group of 50, 60-year-old people who are playing in this golf tournament. And I knew that Mark and I could be successful together because I ignored him all night long. And he talked to people and he worked the room and he was able to interact with people. Again, his style is different than mine, but I don't ever have to worry. Like I'm a person who wants to be in those events and wants to be social. And he has that same ability and that same desire. And so we laugh all the time. When we go to a party, you'll rarely see us next to each other. Like, I'm working one side of the room, he's working the other side of the room. We get home at night and we're like, what'd you learn? So we're just maximizing our time together. But I do think knowing some of those things, like if you're a person who, you know, wants to be out and about, make sure you've got a partner who like is okay with that or wants to do it. I mean, I think there's a lot of different things that can make you successful. And for us, we're really fortunate that we align in so many different ways, and we have a lot of similarity in who we want to be and how we want to be involved in the world around us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that goes right into like having that hard conversation with Mark when you first started seeing each other of like, hey, this is like kind of how I do life. And like, that's a hard conversation to have. But then also, like, that relates into just having hard conversations in general, like having hard conversations in your community, having hard conversations in your relationship, having those hard conversations. Can you talk a little bit about some advice that you have with those hard conversations or just some experience that you have in that area, whether it be in relationships or in your community or things like that, because you're not going to grow unless you get uncomfortable. And let me tell you, those hard conversations are uncomfortable.
People all the time are like, oh, you're such a great speaker. Or another thing I get a lot is like, you just speak your mind, and you're so willing to throw your opinions out there. And, you know, you can tell somebody something really unpleasant and like they don't even get mad about it. But I tell people like, the reason that you look at me and think I'm good at this stuff is because I have tons and tons of practice doing it. And I think that hard conversations, you won't ever get better at them if you don't have those hard conversations. And it's uncomfortable at first, but I'm honestly to the point where there may be a conversation here or there that I'm not looking forward to, but like I'm not nervous to go into a hard conversation. And that's one thing I would say is make sure that as you go into a hard conversation, that you're very clear about what the purpose of the conversation is, what you're wanting to articulate, and think about it ahead of time, because very few people can say the right words, the kind words off the top of their head. But I really do try to, if I'm going to say something that the other person may not want to hear, it's unpleasant. I do try to think about it ahead of time and be as kind as possible. I teach my students that there are some things that people can change and do something about it, and there are things that they can't. So if your friend wears an outfit that's ugly, don't tell them after they got off stage or at the end of the night. Like, like if you're going to say something, it has to be when they can do something about it, or it has to be framed in a way of like, I'm giving you this feedback because I want you to be better. I want to improve the process, you know, whatever that looks like. So I think that is really important as you have hard conversations. It's not meant to be a personal attack, but really trying to step back of, you know, what needs to be said here. And the same thing in communities, right? Like, is this a sacred cow in your community, but it's really hurting the community? Okay, people are not going to want to hear what you have to say. But if you have thought it out ahead of time, if you are, you know, not knocking on other things in the community, but talking about the opportunities or the missed opportunities, whatever needs to happen in the future, how change can be good, people are going to be more open to listening to you in those conversations. And so I laugh a little bit just because I get to have a lot of unpleasant conversations with people, but I also do a lot of coaching of high school students. And one of the things that was a phenomenal lesson for me and that has stuck with me since I was in FFA, when I was a national officer, we worked with a facilitation trainer. And he was incredibly direct with us, probably some of the best coaching I've ever gotten in my life. And he said, I'm not here to be nice, because nice means nothing inside you cares enough to tell the person what they need to hear. So acronym, if you didn't catch that there, but it's true. Like, don't be nice, be helpful, you know, be committed, be invested in the person. And I think that is something that is really hard for people to do because they're so worried about, you know, this person's going to be mad about it or they don't want to hear it. I don't like confrontation. I'm incredibly confrontational, but in a way that most people don't mind. So I think it really is when people learn to trust that like you are a person who is looking for ways to improve the world and is really trying to be positive and helpful, those conversations get easier.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And I love that you hit on like the fact that it is the repetition within that. Like it is not just like you can read all the books or do all the workshops. It's like actually getting out there and having the difficult conversations. And maybe for someone listening, it's starting with just having a difficult conversation with a family member or having a difficult conversation with a spouse or something. And maybe those aren't the easier ones to start with. I
Probably
don't
the
know.
harder ones. Yeah.
Maybe you start in the workplace or something like that. Cause actually, now that I think about it, I think those might be harder because you do have to see those people more often than maybe a work person or just a conversation in your community, but you just have to start. Like it is just the part of like taking that one foot in front of the other approach and like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I am just going to start walking and we will figure it out along the way. Because I think a big part about hard conversations is every person approaches them differently too. It depends on how you approach conversations in general, what your personality is. Are you an extrovert? Are you an introvert? Like, how are you going to prepare for the conversation? All the things like it, we can't just sit here, Jackie and I, with two very similar personalities and be like, hey, this is the blueprint to having hard conversations and bettering your community because it's going to be different for probably every other individual listening than it would be for us when we're talking about it because we are very extroverted people and confrontational people. And I'm not afraid to piss you off when I tell you something. And I've always been that way. Like I have been pissing off people since I could talk pretty much. And you know what? We just took it into adulthood. And that's something that like I'm not afraid to do. But a lot of people, like if you're a people pleaser listening to this, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't even fathom that idea of like having a hard conversation like that. Like that's normal. That's totally normal and fine. I think it's literally just you got to figure it out for yourself, which is really shitty advice sometimes, and I hated it when people told me that like, hey, you just got to go figure it out for yourself. But just take the first step, and it's going to be scary to take that first step, but I think once you get to the 10th or 11th or so on and so forth, it does get easier, and you're going to realize that your life is much better because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also too, if you think about it from the perspective of, like you said, oh, I don't want to be the one who brings it up. That nice isn't just like always give that example about your friend wearing a bad outfit, but if you're not willing to have the conversation, like what's the ramifications of that down the road? And when I see people in leadership positions who aren't willing to have hard conversations, not willing to hold people accountable, which is probably one of the hardest conversations to tell someone like, hey, you're not doing what you've said you're going to do. You're not doing what we've asked you to do, from a board perspective. It is really hard because it's difficult not to take that personally, but sometimes people need to hear those things. And I know people can relate to at any age in their career, like being in the workplace, there are workers who are better at their jobs than others, more fun to work with, more enjoyable to be around. And I feel like at almost every company I've been at least one person during my time there, like nobody really understands why they still have a job at that company for one reason or another. And I honestly think in a lot of those situations, it's because people aren't willing to have hard conversations about the fit, about company, culture, skill level, different things like that. But if you leave it, that organization is just going to lose out on that person's position, the potential that's there. If they had those conversations, maybe the person gets better. Maybe the person leaves the company and you hire a great person. And so I've seen that throughout my career of it may not be fun, but if I can move things in the right direction by having the conversation, it's totally worth it to me to be the bad guy. And I don't know that I necessarily ever get coined as the bad guy, maybe with some people, but I'm okay with that because I'm not doing it to be mean. I'm doing it to be helpful and committed to the purpose of the job, the organization, whatever I'm working on.
Yeah, and I think what you just said is the biggest factor of it of like you're not doing it to be mean. You're doing it because you want this organization to succeed. You're doing it because you want your community to thrive. You're doing it because you want your relationship to grow. Like all of these things, why are you doing it? Why do you have this on your heart? Just ask yourself that of like, hey, like this is the whole reason that we're here is we are an economic development committee or whatever because we are supposed to be developing our economy and developing our community and like there's hard conversations that have to be had in those situations. And I just, yeah.
And I think people will surprise you. I can think of a bunch of different examples, one of which our economic development committee has recently kind of like shifted directions to your point of we've been before prior to me being on the board, they'd spent some money on trying to get businesses to kind of improve their storefront, their facade. And it had some success in the community, but we kind of were thinking about like, is that what we should be doing? Is that maybe where our focus needs to be? And I think going into the conversation, there were a lot of people who were nervous and didn't know where one person or another stood. And we got into the conversation and started talking about the fact that I like to do things in threes, but many rural communities, not just ours, the three big things that rural communities are needing and dealing with from an issue perspective is childcare, workforce, and housing. And in our community, it was really clear to see that like, okay, there's some stuff going on for childcare that's kind of in the works that we've supported. Workforce is a constant thing that you're just trying to develop people and get people into the community. Well, we can't get people here if we don't have housing. And so it was not as scary once we started to have that conversation that I think everybody wanted to like change the direction of what we were doing. But you didn't know that ahead of time, like didn't want to offend the previous board. And so I think it's one of those things that people can surprise you in those conversations because you might bring something up and they might say like, yeah, absolutely. I've noticed that. I can think of a very uncomfortable conversation that I had with my boss before I left Dow. And that conversation was, you don't like seem to have ideas. You don't seem to be excited about what you're doing. Like let's try to get some stuff going. This is my boss talking to me. And really what it came down to was I wasn't excited about my job. I didn't like what I was doing. And I didn't sit at home at night and think about my job. And for me, that was a pretty big aha when I thought about that. Like in the job that I have in now, I'm constantly scheming and like, oh, we could do this at work, or we could run this promotion, or, I need to get involved with this group or organization. Like it lights my fire. I do think about ideas at home. If you're in a job that you're not excited to go to work, but you're also not like thinking about how to improve, how to be better, maybe you're in the wrong job. And that was hard to hear. But it did give me, I would say like the first idea that like, maybe I do need to move on and do something else. And kind of led to me quitting my job and coming back to Kansas. So I think it's important to be in those conversations, like be prepared for people to surprise you, but also be open to the fact that you may put something on the table and you may have to get some uncomfortable feedback as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I seriously couldn't agree more. On the topic of like the rural development and everything like that, as a person that is so extremely involved in their community and really just passionate about developing rural America, small towns in Kansas, everything like that, in the next 5 to 10 years, what do you think that like needs to be happening? What do people need to be focusing on? What do people need to be what do people need to be doing in these rural and small communities across the state of Kansas or just across the nation?
I think there's a couple of things that really make a community be a place that people want to live. Like I said, so looking at your community from the perspective of what do we have and what do we need, I think is the conversation that rural communities need to have. This is not necessarily related to our community, but our house where we live. When we moved into the house, I mentioned earlier, we did not have internet connectivity at all at our house. Like we couldn't be serviced by any of the local companies there. Like there wasn't even like an option where they beamed off a tower. And it was very frustrating. Obviously, there's so many things in the world. Like I was working on my master's degree and like had to go into town to do stuff. And it was really frustrating. And at some point I figured out like, nobody's going to come to our house, rural America, and do this for us. Like we have to get vocal. We have to get involved. And through my work with Farm Bureau and other groups, like started to get involved in it, not just through my work, but I think throughout our community, people were recognizing that like, hey, people are not going to move here to rural America, to our community or to the country outside of our community if they don't have access to internet. And in the last 5 years, it has been incredible, the changes that have happened in our community. Like pretty much anywhere in our county now, you can get high-speed internet, really good quality internet. And I think that's because there were people who finally said, like, we need this. It's an expectation. There was also COVID funding involved, which helped everybody along. But that was a need, and we were able to go out and fill it. I think a lot of Kansas communities right now are having the conversation about childcare. There's a gap in the workforce because lots of women have to, and some men, but mostly women have to stay home. I can point to lots of people in our community who were in professional careers and said, we couldn't afford it anymore. I had to stay home with the kids because there's just not a lot of childcare centers, and in-home childcare is, not as many people are registered to do that. So depending on what your expectations are, it can be really, really hard to find somebody to watch your kids. So a lot of places have taken that on. Our community kind of started a nonprofit and is working on it. So I think for us, that was a big need. Now we're looking at housing. Like, we have houses in our community, but they're not the right kind of houses, which that sounds very like privileged, but we have houses that are really expensive, $500,000+ houses that like only a couple of people who move to our town can even like look at them. And we have a lot of houses that are not very nice, dilapidated, whatever. And if you don't want to go in and do tons of renovations like that, young career, early starting family, professional type housing, like, we don't have that. And if you don't have that, you can't attract people to your account. Like, those are the things that when a family comes to look at your community about like, hey, do we want to live here? They're going to want to make sure you have internet. They're going to want to have a great place to live, good schools or childcare. What's there to do? We have a lot of parks in our community, so we're really blessed. We have lots of education and art. But I mean, that's how you need to be, I think, looking at your community of how do we make sure that we have the things that would make people want to live here, stay here, come home, whatever that might be. I think that's how I kind of look at where are those gaps and how can we fill them the best that we can. Because I think that's what's going to keep your community healthy and people wanting to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. I seriously could not agree more. You hit the nail on the head. All of those topics are very hot topics in a lot of rural communities of like, okay, we want people to come back, but they're not going to come back unless they have somewhere to live. Okay, they're not going to have somewhere to live if they don't have somewhere to send their kids. They're not going to have somewhere to send their kids. Like, they're not going to want to work if they don't have somewhere to send their kids. Like, all of these things, they're just so interconnected. And they're really important. We need to be having with those, a lot of hard conversations come about with that of like, okay, like, if we're not being able to like build housing, what do we need to do? Do we need to start looking at these dilapidated homes? Do we need to start like, do we need to find investors? They're all just really hard conversations, and conversations that need to be had nonetheless. And you just really hit the nail on the head with a lot of that look at your community. Where can you serve your community? Where can you be involved? And just take that first step. It doesn't have to be anything huge. It can be something that you're really comfortable with. If you're an ag kid, getting involved in Farm Bureau or getting involved in like the Kansas Livestock Association or stuff like that, very, very easy steps. And I can promise you that like, reach out to Jackie or I, and we have some very eager individuals involved in both of those organizations that would love to have your phone number and just absolutely love to get you involved because they are eager for people to be involved. And so just find that area that you're like, okay, I have knowledge, experience, history with this area, and just start getting involved there. It doesn't have to be like you're an ag person serving on your hospital board, because that can be very daunting at first. You're like, I don't know anything about medical care or stuff like that. It can be an easy first step, as long as you make it that way, and as long as you're just willing to take that first step. So Jackie, our conversation has been amazing today. I would love to start rounding out the podcast and ask you the question I ask all of our guests. What is your one piece of advice that you would like to leave for the next generation of agriculture?
World belongs to people who show up and try hard.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I need that. Okay, if you guys aren't watching the video of this, you are missing out on Jackie's office and her cat posters. They are the joy of my life right now, but I need a cat poster with that on it, Jackie. And fun fact, all of her cat posters are custom made with her cat on them as well. So they're not just, your run of the mill cat posters. So I need a motivational poster with that put up with your cat in my office, Jackie. Thank you very much. We will be selling them at the link in the bio down below. Oh my gosh, I love it. Jackie, I have so appreciated your time today. Thank you so much for spending some time with us, coming on the podcast, sharing your wealth of knowledge. If anyone out there is like, hey, I want Jackie to speak at my event, I want more of Jackie, I can't get enough of her, where can they find you? Where can they just inquire about all of those things?
Absolutely. So I am out there on most of the social networks. Please don't judge my TikToks. They're not very good. I'm learning. But my Facebook page is Jackie Mundt, all one word. And most of my handles are very similar to that. If you see a girl who's wearing a dirndl and braids in her hair, it's probably me in most of my profile pictures. But that's probably the best way to reach out to me. Like I said, I think on Twitter, I'm at Jackie Mundt. Instagram, some Jackie.Mundt, maybe very, very similar. But feel free to Google me, search me, be a creepy stalker. I love that. But I would be glad to help and visit with anyone because people who want to make the world better, I want to help them.
Yes, absolutely. And I will have all of Jackie's links linked down below. So make sure you go check out the show notes, go get in on all of the things Jackie. And just thank you to everyone listening for tuning into another episode of The Next Generation. And we will see y'all next week.